Hi again, this is Andy, K4GKP, and welcome back to the Ham Whisperer and Lesson 8 in the International Morse Code course. In this lesson, we're going to go over the letters Y, J, L, and 4. But before we do that, let's do a quick review of the previous lessons. In Lesson 7, we covered the letters P, C, Q, and the number 3. Let's do a quick run with those letters. So grab your pencil and paper and let's get started. All right, what you should have copied down there was P, C, Q, Q, the number 3, P, C, C, P, Q, C, Q, and the number 3. All right, let's review all the letters we've learned so far from the previous lessons before we get started with our new letters from this lesson. All right, so stretch out a little bit, grab that pencil, that piece of paper, and let's do a run covering all the previous lessons. All right, what you should have copied down for that run was the letters E, T, I, M, R, S, O, 0, 1, AA, K, D, 2, V, U, G, B, H, P, C, Q, 5, I, T, W, K, and C. All right. If you had any trouble with that run, go back to the previous lessons and review. It's perfectly all right. And if you did okay, let's move on to the first letter for this lesson. All right, the first letter we're going to learn in lesson 8 is the letter Y. Da, 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 Y. Now, be sure you're copying all these Y's down, the letter Y. 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 The letter Y. 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 All right, let's try a few words with the letter Y. All right, copy this one down. All right, that was the word yes, Y-E-S, yes. All right, try this one. All right, that was the word Yankees. 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 All right, one more for the letter Y. Copy this word down. And that was the word why. W-H-Y. Why. All right, if you feel comfortable with the letter Y, let's move on to a random run with the letter Y. All right, grab your pencil and paper and let's do a quick random run. Copy all these down. All right, what you should have copied down was YYMQYPA 0 NYIUWYSQ CPYYTHIGBYYY and Q. All right, if you had any trouble with that, go back and review. If you did okay, let's move on to the next letter. All right, the next letter we're going to learn is the letter J. Da, the letter J. All right, now copy all these J's down, the letter J. 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 Da, the letter J. J. The letter J. The letter J. All right, let's try a few words with the letter J. All right, copy this one down. All right, that was the word Jack. 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 All right, let's try a name. Well, that could be a name or a word, but let's try a name this time. All right, that was Jason. 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 All right, one more word. All right, and that was the name John. 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 All right, if you're feeling comfortable with the letter J, let's move on to a random run. All right, grab your pencil and paper and copy all these down. This is a random run with the letter J. All right, what you should have copied down there was JSI, JH2, INCJWB, JJYT. All right, just like before, if you had any trouble with that, go back and review. If you did pretty good and you're feeling pretty comfortable, let's move on to the next letter. All right, the next letter we're going to learn is the letter L. Dit da dit dit. L. L. Be sure to copy all these down. L. L. Dit da dit dit. L. The letter L. The letter L. All right, let's try a few words with the letter L. Copy this one down. All right, that was Jello. 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 All right, let's try this one. All right, that was like. 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 All right, let's try one more name. All right, and that was Larry. 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 All right, if you're feeling pretty comfortable with the letter L, let's move on to a random run. All right, grab your pencil and paper and let's do a random run adding the letter L to our catalog of letters. All right, let's go. All right, what you should copy down on that run was LYPQCLL90SLYYLJLCVEWPCQSL. All right, if you had any trouble with that, go back and review the letters. If not, let's move on to the number for this lesson. All right, the number we're going to learn for this lesson is the number 4. Dit 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 da. 4. 4 dits and a da. 4. 4. The number 4. The number 4. Four. Be sure to copy all these down. 4. Four. All right, let's try a few numbers with the letter 4 in it. All right, here's the first one. All right, that was 541, 541. All right, try this one. All right, that was 8,024, 8024. All right, one more. All right, that was 1,452 or 1452. All right, if you're feeling pretty comfortable with the number 4, let's move on to the random run for this lesson. All right, here's the Lesson 8 random run. So grab your pencil and your paper. This random run is going to cover all the letters we've learned so far. All right, you ready? Let's get started. And that's the Lesson 8 random run. And now that you're done with the random run, you can check your answers at hamwhisperer.com. You just hit the Morse code course tab at the top of the page, go down to the Lesson 8 link, go to the lessons page, and the random run will be right there. So until next time in Lesson 9, which we will finish the alphabet in, this is Andy, KE4GKP, saying 73, and I hope to hear you on the air soon.